All right, hello. Welcome to my channel. I'm Thomas. I do mostly educational material on this channel, and today is no exception. We're looking at the work of Dewey B. Larson, and he is the uh, progenitor of the reciprocal system of theory. This is a theory of everything that he worked out all the way from his first inklings in about 1930 all the way up until his death in 1990. And during that time, he spent the first 20, 25 years just working it out and came out with his fundamental postulates, just two postulates about how the universe worked. And then spent the next 30 years or even almost 40 writing, well, 30, writing books and articles. And I guess that culminated after his death with the publishing of his final book, Beyond Space and Time, which is what we're focused on today. But just to give you a quick rundown of the theory, of the background, the basic idea is that the universe is not made out of matter, like the Greeks would have told you, or the universe is not made out of energy, like Einstein would tell you, but that the universe is made out of motion. And motion is the relationship between space and time. This is a reciprocal relationship in the same way that something like 2/3 is the reciprocal of 3/2. It's an inversion. And all phenomena, scientific phenomena, are strictly and exclusively relationships between space and time. For example, speed is space over time, space divided by time, 10 miles per hour. But there are many other more complex relationships that are also relationships between space and time, which happens because space and time are both multidimensional. Whatever is a quality of one is a quality of the other. So we know that space is multidimensional, 3 or more dimensions. And we also then know that time is multidimensional in the same way. Time is progressing. It's always getting later and later. So we also know that space is progressing. Things are always getting further and further apart. And that was observed by the Hubble telescope, observing the recession of the distant galaxies. All of the distant galaxies are moving away from us and from each other. The further away they are, the faster they're moving. The model that you would use for that is a balloon that you take a magic marker, put a bunch of dots on the balloon, and you blow up the balloon. All of the dots are moving away from each other, but not in any particular direction. And the further away they are, the faster they're moving apart. That's what Larson calls a scalar motion. And that is the most fundamental motion. Now, also another thing that space and time have in common is that they come only in discrete units. There's a minimal unit of space and a minimal unit of time. And there is no third of a unit or 2/10 of a unit or anything like that. You either have one or you have none. And you can have two or you can have none, but you don't have 1.4. You build them one unit at a time. It's not a continuous thing. It's a step by step. Even though those units are so small that it appears to be continuous, because the units are so small that we can't really resolve them. But 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time, remember, space over time is speed. 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time is the speed of light. And so unlike Einstein, who says that the speed of light is the max speed of the universe, Larson says the speed of light is the midpoint of the universe, or the null point, or the origin, and that there is an entire half of the universe that is moving faster than the speed of light. He calls this the cosmic sector, or sector 2, in contrast to and reciprocal of the sector 1, which is what we are familiar with, the half of the universe that is moving slower than the speed of light, where we notice the material atoms and molecules and the world of chemistry and physics. Now, that world grows by aggregation, bonding from one atom to another, to molecules, all the way up to its most complex level, which is DNA. At that point, DNA becomes eligible to be controlled by a sector 2 unit from the cosmic sector. When that happens, and those two units pair up together, Larson says that what we have is then called the life unit. So life is a combination of a material and cosmic sector entity, a stable combination. And then life evolves and develops up to its most complicated level, which Larson says is the intelligent human being. And at that point, the intelligent human being is eligible to be taken control by a sector 3 entity. Sector 3 is really, I believe, what I just called the origin, or the speed of light, the midpoint, the null point of this universe. And that it is, as Larson says, beyond space and time, which is the title of this book that we're looking at right now. Other people might have called it God, or goddess, or gods, or the spiritual, or the numinous, or the the spirit world, the religious, and Larson calls it Sector 3. So this book is basically about Sector 3 phenomena. Sector 3 communicates with human beings through things like ESP, intuition, beatific images, beatific visions, scientific insight, religious revelation. And our problem is that we're not as more basically single-celled spiritual beings. We are not quite prepared enough to understand these communications, and so we often translate them incorrectly. But we have the potential to get these communications from Sector 3 and get them right, and we have in the past. Now, the human being is kind of at the crossroads here between Sector 2 and Sector 3. Sector 2 is motivating us to survival, and Sector 3 is motivating us to ethical behavior, or good behavior, or right and just behavior. And the human being has to use their free will to choose when those two things are in conflict. It's often that they work in harmony with each other, that Sector 2 and Sector 3 are giving you the same input to decide, giving you the same decisions. But oftentimes they are also in conflict, and then the human being has to choose between the animal behavior of Sector 2, survival, and the good behavior, or the just behavior of Sector 3. Okay, now we are about to start chapter 24, called East and West. And this, I believe, is referring to East and West religions. The last chapter was called Religion Reexamined, and he looked at religion, and really he was kind of looking at the rapprochement between religion and science, making an attempt to provide this linkage between religion and science. And when he was talking about religion, he was talking about it in very vague terms, just like Sector 3. He talks about Sector 3, but he doesn't really give you the characteristics of Sector 3. He's not really talking about any religion in particular. He's not, telling you what Sector 3 is about, other than it's about good behavior, just behavior. But here in this East and West chapter, I think he makes some delineations here between various different religions. Okay, but we'll find out. Start at the top here. The task of applying criteria of validity to the doctrines and beliefs of the various world religions in order to separate the true from the false and the purely secular will not only be long and difficult, but also extremely controversial. The mere fact that it is undertaken at all will be bitterly resented by those religious authorities and their steadfast followers who regard their doctrines as emanations from the deity, and any questions or doubts as sacrilege. But this is a task that must be carried out sooner or later, and the findings of this work have laid the foundation for such a project. It is generally recognized that the essential doctrines of all religions have been overlaid with a large number of non-essential additions. But the distinction between the two classifications that has been subject to much difference of opinion. And he quotes the historian Toynbee. The task of trying to distinguish the accretions from the essence is a delicate one. A more important point is that a separation on this basis does not accomplish the real objective. An item may be an accretion, something that has been added to the doctrines laid down by the founder of the religion, but it still could be non-essential. Even so, it may contribute something worthwhile to the religious structure that justifies its retention. What is really needed is not to eliminate the accretions or non-essentials, but to eliminate the non-religious items. That would be Sector 2 as opposed to Sector 3. This is obviously impossible as long as any assertion or belief is, by definition, religious, if it is part of the creed of any organized religion. But when we set up the requirement that an item must have some relevance to Sector 3 existence in order to qualify as religious, we are able to identify those that are inherently non-religious. After these non-religious items have been eliminated, or at least identified as secular accompaniments of the religious doctrines, the next task will be an inquiry into the validity of these doctrines. The limitations that have to be placed on the scope of the present work make it impossible to pursue an analysis of this kind into any considerable detail. But since the foundations for the development of criteria for distinguishing valid from invalid products of intuitive processes have been laid in the preceding pages, it will be appropriate to go one step farther and illustrate how such criteria apply to some of the general classes of religious beliefs. According to the findings that have been described, the assertions of the major religions with respect to relatively simple religious matters should be essentially correct, inasmuch as the recipients of authentic revelations should have been adequately prepared to understand whatever information of this character they may have received. The principal items included in this category are the reality of metaphysical existence, the presence of a component related to that existence in the human personality, the status of the revelation process as a form of communication from metaphysical sources, and the basic elements of the moral code. If we compare the teachings of the major religions, we should therefore find substantial agreement in these areas, whereas we could expect to find a wide divergence of views concerning any inherently non-religious items that have been incorporated into the religious doctrines, as well as with respect to the more complex and recondite moral and metaphysical questions. In this chapter, we will examine some of the similarities and differences between the major religions in the light of the foregoing theoretical expectations. The conclusions that have been reached as to the locations where divergence can be expected apply even to closely related religious systems, but the points of conflict are more clearly defined where the differences are greater. As it happens, the evolution of religious thought has followed a much different pattern in the Far East than in the West. And for that reason, the most significant comparison we can make is between the Eastern and Western religions. The most striking agreement between East and West is that with respect to the moral code. As pointed out in chapter 18, the general moral principle known as the Golden Rule is contained explicitly or implicitly in the moral teachings of all of the major religions. The detailed instructions and admonitions of the various creeds show more divergence, but even here, the differences are mainly in the respective areas of coverage, rather than in the assertions as to the proper conduct in given circumstances. Each code was originally developed for application to the special situation existing in the place and at the time the religion was established. And the subjects that are emphasized, especially in the sacred writings of the various religions, are strongly influenced by the geographical and temporal settings. All of the major religions also agree as to the reality of some kind of metaphysical existence that has a relation to human life. Here, the agreement is less obvious than in the case of the moral code, because each religion attempts to go beyond mere reality and to say something about the nature and attributes of the metaphysical existence. And the conclusions that are reached in these respects are widely divergent, ranging all the way from the paradise of Islam, in which earthly pleasures are experienced in greatly enhanced degree, by the males at least, to the nirvana of Mahayana Buddhism, which has been described as a passionless peace. The test of agreement between the Eastern and Western religions, the East-West test we may call it, thus supports our finding that there definitely is a metaphysical existence of some kind and a related aspect of the human personality, but that the characteristics of the metaphysical existent are, for the most part, uncertain. There is general agreement that the provisions of the moral code originate in the metaphysical region, but the conflicting beliefs with respect to the characteristics of the metaphysical existence lead to differences in the identification of the authority on which the code rests. The Western religions regard the provisions of the code as commandments emanating from a deity. In some of the Eastern religions, on the other hand, the code is self-sufficient. In Buddhism and Jainism, says Murti, the moral law is perfectly autonomous. The deities only reveal and uphold this order. They do not create the order. Okay, back to Larson. In either case, there must be communication between metaphysical agencies and the human race in order to define the details of the code. And both East and West agree that there is a significant amount of this communication, covering a broad range of subjects in addition to the moral code. Summarizing the foregoing paragraphs, we can say that the East-West test, the test of agreement between the assertions of the major religions of the East and those of the major religions of the West, definitely confirms the four principal religious assertions specified in chapter 23 as having been verified in the earlier passages of this work on the basis of reasoning from totally different premises. We will now turn our attention to the points of disagreement to see what conclusions can be drawn from them. According to our previous findings, disagreement can be expected, 1, where authentic revelations have not actually been received by all. 2, where the revelations as received were not clear enough to all recipients to enable them to be expressed in similar terms in the different religious systems. And 3, where the information alleged to have been received through revelations, whether valid or invalid, is not inherently religious. That is, it deals with matters that have no relevance to Sector 3. The points of disagreement included in categories 1 and 2 are closely related to a major difference between the Eastern and Western concepts of human existence that results from their differing views as to the nature of knowledge. It is usual to divide East and West on the basis of the difference between intuition and intellect. And that's a quote from Raju. But this is back to Larson, but this is not the whole story. Indeed, intuition and intellect are not directly comparable. Information is obtained from metaphysical sources by means of intuition, but intellect or reason is merely a tool that can be used to process information and put it into a usable form. It is true that since the ultimate source of the information derived from intuition is the metaphysical existence, the intuition itself is merely a transmission mechanism. Okay, I think we're going to stop it right there, even though we're in the middle of a paragraph, because the paragraph goes on for quite a while here. And we will return to this chapter here starting tomorrow. So have a great day, and thanks for tuning in. Hope to see you soon.